Extreme superheroes. The next one I read, I didn't read this as a independent single issue series. I read the trade hardcover of Batman: The Widening Gyre. And this is one written by Kevin Smith. Yes, that Kevin Smith of the movie fame. The art is by Walter Flanagan, who's a friend of his and has also done some indie comics.
Cool.
And so on the one hand, speaking, to go back to the paneling, there is some really interesting paneling in this. And I think the art is really good. I think, unfortunately, Kevin Smith gets a bad rap. He did Green Arrow a long time ago in 2002. Quiver, and the one after that, which is The Sound of Thunder or something? I don't remember. It's one I actually want to read, but I don't have it in front of me. Those I thought Quiver was really excellent. I really loved it, and I really like his comic writing. But he gets a lot of flack because he misses deadlines. He can't keep anything straight.
He doesn't just miss deadlines by a couple of weeks or
it's
a month or so.
A couple of years.
Yeah, I mean
he's way out.
There's a big difference there.
Yeah. So and this Batman, a lot of people gave him some flack because his Batman does stuff that, it doesn't happen in other I mean, the one thing, it's literally an offhanded comment Batman makes in one panel that has really nothing to do with a story, where he mentioned that one explosion gave him a bladder spasm in his early days. And everyone's like, oh my God, you can't have Batman piss himself. But, it's like, this is just, getting upset about an offhanded remark he makes in one panel, when the straight truth of it is, Kevin Smith's whole thing, I think, in The Widening Gyre, and I guess in Cacophony that came first, is sort of this kind of quote-unquote gritty realism, which always makes me laugh when it comes to comics. It's like, come on,
and I think
you've got a crazy guy running around in a cape. I mean, we're done with realism.
With superheroes especially, because really, at least speaking for me, I don't really want my superhero stories to be realistic most of the time. I want them to be fantastical.
Sure.
That's why I read superhero comics, because of the fantastical nature of the stories and these people that are doing, well, super heroic, superhuman things that couldn't happen in reality. And I don't want too much realism, I should say, injected into my superhero comics, because then that takes the part that I enjoy most out of the story.
Sure. So I do think
I have to agree. I mean, I wouldn't get in an uproar about one panel, but I don't want to think about Batman pissing his pants. He's Batman, for God's sakes.
That is true. So, in general, I will say I like this, that I did enjoy it. After I read it, I saw what people were saying online. A lot of people were saying, you have to read Cacophony first. You don't. I didn't. I don't know what happened in the 3-issue Cacophony series.
Briefly, what is the story of The Widening Gyre, since I didn't read it?
The story is, and I think this is why a lot of people were a bit pissed off, is that it's a little bit more of a... You're right, but is that it was a bit more of a sort of psychological story. The story here is an old love, Silver St. Cloud, comes back.
I love comic book names.
Yeah. Comes back into Batman's life. And so he rekindles a romance that becomes very serious. At the same time, a new hero, a guy who does the same kind of, jumping from rooftops and all this that he does with a goat demon's head called Baphomet. I think it's Baphomet. Let me just quickly...
You've got to look at the book here.
I do, because that's a major thing. Baphomet, I guess, because it's PH. Okay, Baphomet comes into town, and he's doing good and everything. And so Batman's really dealing with an issue of, I have a chance at real love, at a real life. Can I quit, or at least go part-time and have a real life, actually be a person and not just be this sort of, symbol in the night. And, a lot of people, I think, almost limit superhero comics to simply the big epic battles And that's too bad. And I really like it when they do kind of address the psychological images. And this is part of, I guess, the whole quote-unquote realism. But you can have, a sort of psychological realism without getting too caught up in, like, the day-to-day realism. So I did enjoy that part of the story. I think that one of the reasons they said that maybe you needed to know the previous story, Cacophony, is that what he does to sort of show Batman's mental gyrations it literally varies. Like, everything begins with a date and then moves to a nighttime combat, and then next day is a date in the day and then a nighttime combat. And so there's this constantly rotating thing. And there's villains, I believe, from Cacophony. And so if you don't know Cacophony, you might miss that. The thing is that the villains or villain or whatever that I think people are pointing to is, oh my God, you have to have read Cacophony or it won't make sense. They're actually from his run on Green Arrow originally. Okay. So I actually knew them or knew of them at the least. So I think that may have taken care of it. So I wouldn't give it a perfect rating. I'd say that there were a couple things that held it back in my mind. One is, as I said, it was always varying between, first a date and then the nighttime combat. And then, all this was all playing into he's helping me now. Baphomet is helping me now. Can I pull back? Can I take a night off? And after a while, it got to be a lot of the same. Yeah. It was like date, combat, date, combat, date, combat. And it's a 6-issue series. And after a while, you were just thinking, okay, get on with it. I mean, it could have been a fantastic 4-issue series. Yeah. So I think that maybe a little too much of that maybe could have hacked out some of that. And speaking of hacking, that is my next complaint. I have to say, for a mainstream comic, I was really kind of surprised at the level of gore that they allowed in the Widening Gyre. Now, obviously, you and I don't have an issue with gore. I mean, we were just talking about We 3, which is a really gory comic. But that is a Vertigo adult comic. It's very specific, says adult, etc. So, a kid goes to, I can imagine an 11-year-old at Barnes & Noble or whatever says, Mommy, look, Batman,
Sure.
The Widening Gyre.
This doesn't have a for mature readers, recommended for mature readers tag on it anywhere.
Sure. And as you know, most graphic novels these days in the bookstores are shrink wrapped.
Yeah.
So it's not like Mom could open it, turns to the back, it says, just the guy who wrote another Batman. And, there's only a single word that gives you any indication. It says an intense examination. And so, okay, well, intense can mean anything, and intense is an overused word. And then the kid opens it. There's, half people with intestines spilling all over. There's severed heads being chewed on. There's, body parts everywhere. I mean, it's like real, serious, like hard R. I mean, this is like, in a movie, this would like be a hard R movie. And I don't actually think you needed it in the story. I don't, it's one thing if the story requires the gore.
Sure.
But Batman doesn't require a horror movie around him.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, I don't have a problem with gore and comics. I mean, my God, The Walking Dead is one of my favorite comic series.
Oh, that's a little bloody, is
Just a bit. I don't have a problem with it either, but I work with kids, so I am, I guess, a little bit more sensitive than most to what kids are exposed to.
Hey, be sensitive. I'm sounding like old man Merton right now.
And my kids at work do come in and talk about the stuff that they watch and the things that they read, and I'm always just like, oh man, you guys shouldn't be exposed to this already. So it is surprising that a Batman title would have so much extreme violence.
Right, and you'd think that Kevin Smith particularly would be aware of that, both because he's a parent, but also because at one point he talks about something that the other Batmans avoid, which is the fact that here is a psychotic running around in a cape and a cowl with a child, with basically an 11 or 12-year-old child dressed in a Speedo. I mean,
what's weird about that?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't understand.
Someone alert Nambla. But, I mean, that alone is weird. And it addresses that. And he even says, kind of trying to justify it, saying, I know at hard times these people have had who have been Robins, and I've tried to give them some therapy. I've tried to help them, but I realize that this isn't the way to go. And from now on, if I have a sidekick, it's gonna be an adult with training.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where the Baphomet also plays into that as well. But it's like you wanted to hear Batman say that.
Sure.
You wanted to hear this man say that, okay, he had his reasons, that there may have been legitimate reasons to have children. And subsequent Robins have been older, but they weren't right. And that he realizes that he's a responsible adult.
Well, and I remember
he's done with that.
It was interesting listening to the commentary on one of the Batman the Animated Series where Bruce Timm and company were talking about that same thing as to why they made Robin college-aged in the animated series stuff, because they also addressed that, just being uncomfortable with the fact that Batman would be putting a child who possibly isn't old enough to make his own decisions about if he wants to be in these really dangerous situations or not, that would be really irresponsible of Batman to put his ward, who he is responsible for this child's care and protection, to put him in these very dangerous situations when he may not be capable of understanding exactly what he's getting into. But when you make him college aged or even late teens,
old enough to make the decision,
then he can make that decision, and it's not quite as uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And